Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Working at Woodworking Podcast. My name's Roger Kugler. I'm here to help you get started in professional woodworking, either on a full-time or part-time basis, and to help those of you who have a small shop get more out of it, make more money, save more time. Last week, we talked about doing prototype work. Should you get into that? Hope you found that helpful. And I thought this week it would be a good segue to talk about production work, tips and tricks. Now, if you have been doing woodworking for a number of years, you've probably built a few items, maybe a dining room table, bookends for the living room, bookcases, but you were not under any particular deadline. It was something you did for fun. I remember those days. But now you're doing this for money, and you can't take your own sweet time the way you used to. You need to get this stuff out the door, especially if you're doing production type work. This could be making products, cutting boards, for instance, and selling them online. Maybe you're making knife holders or birdhouses, any number of items that you are making multiples of. That is production work. And so the goal of production work is to make as many as possible within a given time at the highest level of quality. And I think there are two things that you always have to remember when you're doing production work. Number one is to reduce movement and improve repeatability. That's goal number one. So how do we do this? Let's say you need to make 100 wooden blocks that are 7 inches long. And if you take your tape measure out and you mark 7 inches, take it to the miter saw and cut it off, and take your tape measure out and mark 7 inches and take it to your miter saw and cut it off. Oh my God, I want to kill myself just saying that, let alone doing that. So the obvious solution here, and you already know this, is to set up some type of a stop block. You slide the material on until it makes contact with the stop block, and you cut it. Take that one off, slide the material down to the stop block, make your next cut. Remove that, so on and so forth, repeated 100 times. So stop blocks are your friend. You can get so much productivity out of a really simple stop block. It doesn't have to be elaborate. I literally have clamped a piece of wood to whatever, and that was my stop block. Now, if you want to get fancy, let's talk about the miter saw station. You can have some type of fence set up and multiple types of stops attached to that fence. I made my own. I just took pieces and parts and put it together, used some channel. It works wonderfully. I really like the flip-up style if they are stiff. I don't want anything flopping around. And if you're pushing a piece of material up to it, it needs to stop right there. No flex in the flip-up styles. I also have some what I call L style that there's no flip to them. Once they're tightened down, they're there. I have one production item that I need to make cuts at 2 different lengths. So I set up the L style or the hard stop at the maximum length, and then I set up my flip stop at the minor length so that I can slide the material down, square it off, slide it to the minor length, the flip stop, cut that, remove it, slide the material all the way down to the hard stop, cut that. Being able to flip a stop up out of the way, really, really helpful. You could set up 3 or 4 different flip-up stops on your fence depending on what you're doing. you can spend some money on these flip stops. They're not exactly cheap. And with a little bit of ingenuity and some, dare I say it, door hinges, you can make your own flip stops that are incredibly accurate, incredibly stiff, and incredibly cheap. So that's stops on a miter saw. What about a bandsaw? Could you put stops on your bandsaw? Absolutely. If you are cutting, let's say, tenons for a mortise and tenon joint, set up a stop block. There's a number of different things you can do with a bandsaw. How about a table saw? Oh, absolutely. Here you might want to employ some type of a magnetic stop. Either make those yourself or there's various types that you can buy. You can clamp stops to your fence so that you can do, let's say you're doing a dado cut and it needs to stop at a specific point. There you go. You could set up a stop block to do a plunge cut on the table saw. Not moving the wood, but moving the saw blade. Don't try to lower a piece of wood down onto a spinning table saw blade. Not a good idea, but you could clamp that wood down and then bring the blade up through the wood to make some type of stop cut. If you use a crosscut sled on your table saw, pretty much the same thing as a miter saw. You can set up stops for a number of different parts. Just make sure that you never trap a cutoff between a blade and the stop. Bad things will happen. So always set your stops for the cut length and let your waste fall away from the blade. Probably don't need to mention that, but just needed to mention that. How about a drill press? Absolutely, you can use stops. If you use a fence on your drill press, well, that in essence is a stop. You can mount stops on the drill press fence to precisely position things to get a precision hole exactly where you need it. Now, when using stops, a couple things to think about. Dust is probably your number one enemy, because if you get a little bit of, sawdust built up that you trap between your material and the stop, that's going to throw your cut off. When I make my stops, I leave like maybe 1/8 of an inch or so that any dust that does accumulate there can get pushed under the stop and it doesn't impede. You can also make stops with a corner. It doesn't always have to be at right angles for the material to abut up to it. Make that stop with, let's say, just a corner, so there's a 45-degree angle. Dust is not going to accumulate next to that. It's just going to slide right past it. So be careful. That could really throw your accuracy off. Speaking of accuracy, how accurate are your scales on your miter saw fence? If you have that set up with, I hope you have that set up with some type of a scale that you can quickly set stops at specific lengths. What about the scale on your table saw? How repeatable is that? Can you go to 16 and 15 30-seconds every single time and hit that mark just perfectly within a 32nd of an inch? Well, you might be able to do that in your 20s when your eyes are really, really good, but as we males age, our eyes tend to just, they go to crap. I have found that digital scales are a godsend. I have them on my table saw. I have them on my planer. They are wonderful. I can go to 19.475 all day long and hit it every single time. And they're not that terribly expensive. I have a Wixie scale on both my planer and table saw. Pro Scale is another brand. Their DigiFence looks like a good system. What about stops on your router table? Absolutely. Easy to do. Here, you may want to do some type of a plunge cut. If you're like cutting a groove in a piece of wood, piece of plywood, you set up the beginning stop block and the ending stop block, and you can just push the piece of wood between those two blocks, and you have a precise groove. Now, when you get into the European saws, they have all kinds of fancy bells and whistles. That's a bit out of my price range, so I'm not going to mention anything more about that. Ooh, one neat thing for your router table. Have you seen these digital router lifts? Very, very cool. There's a keypad. You can punch in, 0.625, and the router bit comes up to that height above the table. Some of them are programmed so that if you're cutting box joints, you enter the diameter of the bit you're using and the width of the box sides that you're cutting, and the little computer algorithm does everything else. It will actually set the fence at the proper distance for your first cut, and each additional cut, it will move the fence. Really, really incredible. I believe it was NextWave that did that. I got on their website, and the one that I remember doesn't seem to be available anymore, but this summer they're releasing the RS1000 router fence system and lift, and no idea how much that's going to cost. If you're just looking for a router lift that is digital, take a look at MLCS Power Lift Pro. Catalog link down below. For about $650, you can get a tablet controller and move that router bit up and down to your heart's content. No need for wrenches or knobs to crank the router lift up and down. Looks like a really, really neat system. Now, remember we said that our number one goal was to reduce movement and improve repeatability. We have to talk about the cutoff, the part that you just spent all that time setting up your stop blocks to cut. Now we need to handle those quickly and efficiently. Now, one thing I have done is that one of my products, I need to cut hardwood into like 3-inch blocks and 3.5-inch blocks and 4.25-inch blocks to length. These pieces are only 2 to 3 inches wide, but I need hundreds and hundreds of them. Well, the miter saw is perfectly designed for making crosscuts, but to set up a stop block and make the cut, remove the part, make the cut, remove the part, make the cut, remove the part. Yeah, incredibly boring and not efficient. So I built up a jig that actually elevates the workpiece about 2 inches up off the bed of the miter saw. And to that, I built a stop that is adjustable, that I can bring the miter saw down through the material, and it cuts it off. As it does so, the piece, overcome by gravity, falls down, hits part of the miter saw, and then tumbles into a 5-gallon bucket. So for each cut, it tumbles away. I slide the material down until it hits a stop. I bring the saw down through the material. It falls away. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Once the bucket gets full, I dump that out onto the work table and go from there, basically stacking them in units of 10. I would love to work on some type of a bowl feeder that would take those blocks and then, using the magic of a bowl feeder, bring those up, and then some type of contraption that would actually stack them. Kind of working on that, not a super big priority, but that would be another way of increasing some automation to this process. Now, I know I mentioned don't trap a piece between the stop and the table saw blade, and I know my setup does exactly that, but since gravity is at play here, that cutoff piece actually falls before I bring the blade back up, and I eliminate the kickback opportunity by doing that. You have to be careful, whatever you're building here, that it's not going to generate a kickback. I know that from experience. So you might be in a position where you could actually use gravity. If you were, let's say you were making cutting boards and you cross-cut all of your pieces to 16 inches, but now you have to size them by running them through the table saw, you could just run those pieces through and let gravity take over, and they topple into a bin off the end of your table saw. Okay, so you have your parts cut. Now what are you going to do with them? And if you're batching things out like the hundreds, you need to put them someplace. This might be where some type of roll-round cart could come in really handy, that you can stack those parts on something that you can move around your shop to the next station for processing. You could set this up for both an in-feed cart and an out-feed cart. So the things that you need to perform an operation on, they're stacked, let's say, to your left, and then once they go through the process at the drill press or the router table, then you can stack them on your right, or vice versa, whatever works for you. But having some place to put the parts after they're machined is really, really helpful, so you don't have stuff scattered all over your shop. Years ago, I was doing a product that I actually made a bin that I would stack the parts in, and then I could carry that around from one place to the other. So now let's talk about part holding. This is a big deal. You have to clamp that part to the work surface to perform an operation on it. In many, many instances, how are you going to clamp that? If you're breaking out the C-clamp or the F-style clamp and screwing the handle down to make contact, to hold it securely, and making the operation, and then unscrewing the F-clamp and taking the part off and setting it on one of your stacking trays, and then putting the next part from your end feed cart and tightening the F-clamp down. Oh my gosh, no, we can't do this all day. At least not making any money doing this all day. So you need some way of quickly clamping parts. 3 ways we can do this. Number 1 is using some type of a toggle clamp. Now you've seen these. These are the red-handled clamps. It's a lever that you push the lever down or pull the lever down, and this little black rubber thing goes down and clamps it. They are marvelous. You can build all types of jigs and fixtures to hold things with these toggle clamps. They make these toggle clamps in all different configurations for vertical and horizontal positioning. I have one that is a plunger clamp that I push the red handle down and the little black tip moves horizontally or vertically, however I have it rigged up. It's marvelous. I can't tell you how much time that saves me. And just doing a little bit of research for this episode, I came across the toggleclampstore.com. Can you believe that? Yeah, there's a store out of California. The only thing they sell is toggle clamps. It's wonderful. Check it out. Link in the show notes. So toggle clamps is one solution. Pneumatic clamps is another solution. Now, in their simplest form, some bright person put a pneumatic cylinder on a toggle clamp. So instead of you having to grab the red handle, push, pull one way or the other, a pneumatic cylinder does that for you. Why is this exciting? Because you can have that pneumatic cylinder set up to a pneumatic foot switch, and you step on the switch, air goes through the clamp, pushes the thing closed, holds your part, you perform the operation, take your foot off the switch, the pneumatic cylinder retracts, opens up the clamp, you can take your part out. You can do this all day long and actually have some fun doing it. Look on Amazon. Just amazing what they have. You could also buy cylinders and do your own DIY thing. I've included a link to Izzy Swan's YouTube video. Incredible. I wish I had seen that 10 or 15 years ago. There's another YouTube video I came across by Neo7 CNC that he sets up a pneumatic saw clamp, all built with parts that you can get online. I have the link in the show notes. So the level of automation you want to bring to your production operation is kind of up to you and your imagination. There's things out there that can make these things very quick, very simple. Remember last week I mentioned that 30% goal of reducing the time for a prototype to the production model. This is how you do that, by eliminating as much movement as possible. And if you're standing there screwing an F-clamp and unscrewing an F-clamp to hold a piece and take the piece out, that is just so much time that you're never going to get back. So you need to do something like this that can really increase that process. In addition to pneumatic clamps, what about vacuum? Oh man, this is something I've really gotten excited about over the last 6 months or so. Again, going back to Izzy Swan, you need to check out his channel. He has some really incredible things on there. But in one of his videos, he was talking about this new thing called a Grabo. It's how do I describe it? It is a handheld vacuum pump system that it weighs only a few pounds. You turn the thing on, you stick it to a piece of plywood, it takes a suction on that plywood, and using the built-in handle on the pump, you can pick up and carry the plywood wherever you need to go. So imagine, a 4x8 sheet of plywood, that's 50, 60 pounds. You put the Grabo on there, it just takes literally seconds for it to draw a full vacuum, pick it up and carry it around. No more need for these fancy little gadgets that clamp onto the top or, go under the bottom that you lift up and carry. This Grabo, you could move 100 sheets an hour. Well, maybe not that many, but you get the idea. You could move plywood. You could move drywall sheets with this. Oh my gosh. Tile setters have been just going gaga over this. Izzy shows how he made a fixture that he sets the Grabo on and takes a vacuum, which takes the vacuum on a hose from the fixture that you can use to make all kinds of clamping systems. Let's say you were doing some template routing, cutting boards or something like that. You can use the Grabo and this fixture to take a vacuum on the template to hold the workpiece to the template as you're cutting out the piece on the router table. Brilliant. You can use the Grabo to make or buy little pods that you set on your workbench that you can use to hold pieces and parts. I made a little system where I can set down like rails and stiles for a face frame cabinet. Turn on the Grabo, it takes a suction, holds the piece. I can use my Festool domino to put in the dominoes. One thing about the Festool domino, sometimes it's a little hard to actually hold the piece that you're putting the domino in. This solved that problem beautifully. You can buy a little vacuum clamp pod kit from Rockler for like $60 and get yourself up and going. Pods vacuum clamps is another system. I found those on veneersupplies.com. It's a entire system that you can get into to really vacuum clamp anything that you can think of. I know, we're starting down a rabbit hole here. If you go with the Grabo, that could do wonderful things around your shop, but you're just right around the corner from buying a vacuum pump and then getting into vacuum clamping, such as in a veneer press. Now we've opened up things to bent laminated curves and just all kinds of things. Bent lamination, that's huge. And there's really no better way of doing some of that stuff than with a vacuum clamp. One little caveat, if you're looking for a vacuum pump, cheap is usually not good. They're great for sucking oil out of your truck, but if you're using that over a long period of time, the cheaper ones just don't have a very long duty cycle, so like maybe 20%, and they have a tendency of overheating if you're using them in a long clamping situation or a long veneer press situation. So it usually pays to spend some money on a good quality vacuum pump. We're talking $300-$400 maybe. There's some good options on veneersupplies.com. Take a look at that. So your goal is to conserve as much energy as possible. Eliminate as many steps between one operation and another. If you are blessed with a really big workshop, try to set up workstations as close together as possible so that you're not walking from one end of the shop to another just to do something that takes 30 seconds. I personally don't have that problem. I have a very small shop and everything's within just literally a few feet. If you think about a kitchen, a well laid out kitchen, they use what's called the kitchen triangle, and it basically says that the refrigerator, the sink, and the cook stove should be within 21 feet. So you form this kitchen triangle, and if you add up each leg between those three major appliances, it should be no more than 21 feet. I think it's 21 feet. That may be an old standard. I'm not sure what the new standard is. But anyway, the idea is to have things close enough together so that you're not walking, 150 feet between workstations. So be lazy. Okay, goal number 2 in production work is to reduce waste. And now, more than ever, we really need to concentrate on reducing waste. If you're working with sheet goods, plywood, maybe MDF, you've got to be using some type of an optimizer for your layouts. CutListOptimizer.com is free. It works. It is wonderful. If you're building cabinets and you have 4 boxes that you need to make, 2 sides, backs, bottom shelf, maybe some type of a top supports. You have your cut list laid out. You need so many sides. You need so many top supports, so many kick plates, etc. You enter all of these dimensions into the cut list optimizer and boom, it produces a diagram that shows you how you should cut these out of the available plywood. It will tell you how many sheets you need. Maybe if grain is not an issue, such as, painted cabinetry, then that can actually reduce the number of sheets of plywood you need by simply changing the orientation of various parts. The computer does all of that. It is really incredible. You can also use this for just hardwoods. If you're building a credenza and you have all of your parts from your cut list, enter those into the optimizer and it will spit out how many board feet you are going to need. You can enter the widths of your hardwood and the length of your boards. It will spit out how to cut these, making the greatest optimization of the material available. Now, it doesn't handle grain matching, so that's something that you're going to have to use your own eyes and brain to figure out. But if grain matching is not a big thing, then these things are absolutely wonderful. Can't recommend CutListOptimizer.com highly enough. Not an affiliate. The thing's free, so, go figure. Another way to reduce waste is to save your scraps. No matter what you're building, there is some leftovers. If these are of any particular size, save those. Organize them some way, maybe by species, maybe by size, depending on what you're making, what you're building. Take advantage of the material that you're using. If you are buying plywood to make an XYZ and there's a quarter sheet left over, boom, that goes right back into production. And if customer A paid you to make an XYZ and there's some left over, well, that's not free to customer B. You're charging customer B for whatever amount of plywood that is needed for customer B's project. If you happen to have a leftover from customer A, bonus for you. That's how you increase your efficiency, your profit. Nothing is given away. So what do you do with the stuff that you just can't use? It's too small. Maybe you're not doing that product anymore. Well, this is what we call waste. And in the cut list optimizer up there, it takes waste into consideration. You actually can go in and enter a certain percentage of what you think your waste is going to be, particularly with hardwoods. So what do you do with your waste? Well, you have small pieces, small scrap wood, and you have sawdust. The sawdust you can use. You can compost sawdust. You can use it as mulch. You can use it as a lawn treatment. Where I live, we basically have clay. They've scraped the topsoil off, whenever they built the development and put down like maybe 2 inches whenever they reinstalled the grass. There's not much there. So every year I take some sawdust and I spread it around the lawn, and then that slowly decomposes, breaks down, and increases the organic matter. Caveat with walnut. Walnut is a unique species of wood that doesn't like to play well with other species of wood. And there's chemicals in walnut that will actually retard the growth of other species. So I wouldn't use that in a flower bed. I wouldn't use it around animals. You might be able to sell or give away sawdust to a stable. They use it for bedding. You don't want to give them walnut because that will actually cause an infection in horses' hooves. So stay away from that. But if you have a corner of the yard that you just want to, let it kind of take over and compost, you can do that. Or you could send it to the landfill. And of course, you can always burn it. Some people have outdoor furnaces and use hydroponic heat in their shop. That is a wonderful, way of using up scrap. A wood kiln operator is using basically their scrap from the lumber operation to power the kiln and dry the wood. If you have pieces of some size, you can sell it. For years, I sold scrap on Etsy. I would make a 5-pound box, put it in a regional B size box, and I shipped it literally all over the country. A lot of people, most people, don't have access to wood. They can go to the big box store, but they're buying a large piece of wood. So your scraps are actually valued to somebody someplace. I was amazed at how people used my scrap. A lot of teachers bought the scrap, and they could use it in their classrooms. I mean, come on, just think about it. You empty a great big box of scrap wood out there, put down a glue bottle. You got the little buggers busy for 45 minutes. I had a grandmother in Virginia who called me and said that she had 7 grandchildren who were coming to spend, I think it was 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, with her up in the mountains during the summer. And she was trying to figure out how she was going to keep 7 of them occupied. She ordered 50 pounds of scrap wood and paid me very well for it. I mean, I did a little bit of milling to kind of get some uniform sizes, but she was so grateful. And like I said earlier, you can burn it. We have a wood stove in our house, and I store the scraps in 35-gallon trash cans, the plastic type that have a real good weather seal. Leave them outside in the backyard. I probably have 10 that I just kind of rotate through. Usually I can get through 10 barrels during the winter. We've had a couple mild winters that I had some trash cans left over full of wood, but then I could sell that. Okay, so that kind of wraps everything up. Just a real quick review. We talked about the 2 main goals of production. Number 1 is to reduce movement and improve repeatability. In other words, be as lazy as you possibly can, and we can do that through using stop blocks and material handling carts and different types of work holding apparatuses. Everything from toggle clamps, pneumatic clamps, and vacuum clamps. And goal number 2 was to reduce waste. Cutlass Optimizer is your friend. And saving and reusing the larger reusable pieces of scrap that you generate. And if you can't reuse them, well, recycle them in some way, either through compost, giving them away, selling them, whatever. Recommendation for the week? Well, all the videos I've mentioned. Izzy, Swan, a few others. You should have a really good time watching some of these. Missed job? Surprisingly, it's a production job that I might take on. I have to do some calculations, but I'm probably going to pass on it because my plate is just full. Well, I thank you for tuning in, listening to the podcast. I would love to hear from you. You could send comments, complaints, and criticisms to Roger at workingatwoodworking.com or give me a call, 812-325-9823. All the contact information is in the show notes. And of course, I do offer coaching if that's something that you think would help your business. Maybe you're just kind of stuck. This is February after all, which, thank God, is the shortest month of the year. So until next week, happy woodworking.